Alright, so as promised, we're going to be going over the character dynamics in the Scarlett's Roost story. And kind of the character arcs that everybody goes through. One of the crucial players in all of this would be, of course, Rose / Scarlett. She kind of... Her whole thing is she starts off with a chip on her shoulder and a whole lot of deep resentment and anger at herself. And a lot of survivor's guilt. And she pairs that up with all kinds of lashing out every which way. And she hates the idea of the nobility abusing people, especially because it was the nobility that sicked monsters on her home, burned it down, and got her family killed. But when you really peel back the layers, it's more complicated for her than that. She clearly doesn't hate all nobility because she has a soft spot for Oceana. It's that she can't stand the idea that there are people who think that they have the right to take life and death into their own hands. And she didn't stop to think about the fact that she had, in her carelessness, neglected the fact that she had an influence on people. Her genuine nature meant that when she would talk and interact with people, it had an impact. She had created a mythos about herself just by her bombastic nature and her story. And by being careless with how she spoke, she herself was not taking into consideration other people's lives and the effect that she had on them. So her whole thing over the course of this is not only accepting kind of that role of the folk hero that speaks for the everyman, but also the responsibility that comes with that. It is a form of status in its own right. She's not just some random person. She is Scarlet Phoenix. And that means something in this world. And so she kind of grows up, in a sense. She was being childish. She was lashing out. She hadn't fully understood the consequences of her actions. And when they came back to bite her, all she could do was just accept responsibility and try and fix it. And good old coming of age story. But this gets us on to Oceana, who is basically the... I wouldn't call it her foil, but I would definitely say she's a crucial part of Scarlett's journey. Because Oceana is part of the nobility. She's a part of the very class that Scarlett rages against, but Oceana has a different approach, a far more measured and considered approach to the nobility. And she puts herself in her proper position. Namely, she goes, hey, I am a member of the nobility. It is my job to be the voice and acting hand of the people under my care, because they do not have the strength in their own right to see their will done, and it is my job as a member of House Oceana, the 13th circle of the nobility. It is my job as the representative of House Oceana to accomplish that. And the reason she became such a skilled duelist is because in Valiance, the dueling circuits is kind of like a social circle at that point. By being a successful duelist, it helps you further, gussy up and butter people up and get things done politically. And so that was kind of her thing. And that's how she met, it was while she was training to eventually participate in the arena that she met Scarlett's mom in the first place. And being a mercenary, when Oceana's family went, that's the Swordbreaker, we're going to have her teach you swordsmanship so you can learn from the best the arena has to offer, so we can look good for the other noble houses. It was Leah's, the whole thing, my brain hurts a little, but it was Leah's kind of psychotic but lackadaisical approach that ended up really causing Oceana to realize that combat is more complicated than simply a social interaction. There is a level of efficiency and ruthlessness one must bring to a proper battlefield. And you can enjoy it. You can enjoy yourself while doing it. But you can't allow anything to stop you from taking the most effective and direct solution to your problems. And in the process, she realized that as a member of nobility, she could never really become a mercenary. That was not her role. Her role is to enact the will of her people, not her own will. But over the course of training with Scarlett, because they are roughly the same age, they are. I think Oceana's only about a year or two older than Scarlett, so she's probably about 20, 22. At tops, like 22 at the oldest. To Scarlett's 19 or 20 at the beginning of the story. And Oceana, throughout the entire story, is implied to have some measure of, let's say, personal attachment to Scarlett. But she makes immensely clear throughout the whole thing that even if it was true, they live in two very different worlds. And it's not just, oh, I'm nobility and you're a peasant. No, it's their difference in their roles. She recognized Scarlett as a folk hero before Scarlett did. And heroes are to embody the will of the people and to ignite their passions, whereas it's the nobility's job to enact it. It is two very separate roles. And to try and blend the two together, to bring Scarlett into the nobility or to leave the nobility for Scarlett, would hurt the people at large more than it would help anything. And so the two have kind of that understanding of, like, Scarlett shows no romantic interest in anybody in the series. Like, she, not openly at all. And if there was anybody she had chemistry with, it would be Oceana. But it's just not. Scarlett's too frickin' dramatized to open herself up that way. She can hardly even admit she has friends. The only reason she's as chummy and friendly with the guild as she is because it fills that emotional need for a family of sorts. But she's too heavily traumatized and has too much survivor's guilt to ever really let herself live her life. So Oceana is entirely comfortable just being the support emotionally and mentally that Scarlett needs to get done what she needs to do as her role as a folk hero. There was going to be a third member of that party who was a female blacksmith, built like a butch linebacker. But she does exist, but she's not really as close as those two are, and I'm fine with retiring it. I thought about reworking that too, like making her not a butch linebacker, but the idea of this butch linebackery, very gentle sort that's just very content to hang out in her forge and not getting involved in the larger world, and not even like shut-in nerd, but something damn near close. That was such an interesting dynamic, because you had just this like bombastic personality who accidentally fricks over the world, and you have this quiet, eloquent, regal air from Oceana, and then you just have this really kind, down-to-earth person that kind of bridges the gap between the two and keeps them, all balanced out and kind of grounded and honest with themselves. And that was a nice little dynamic I wanted, but it was never going to work the way I wanted it to. So she exists, but she's really a side character. Then you have Ramelia's character arc, where there's Ramelia do Tamago and Leona LaRue. By the way, I want to make this clear. Scarlett's Roost originally started conceptually as a story where I was like, how do I prove to the mainstream that one does not need to make a crappy story with crappy characters just to have diversity? And so yes, the cast is going to go all up and down the spectrum there. But I wanted to make them people. I wanted to make them characters, and I wanted to give them a story. I wanted to make compelling characters in a compelling realm. So if you're like going, oh, this is just a bunch of diversity ticks, I hope that when I describe these characters, they strike you as a little bit more than that. That was the intention. And if they don't, maybe it's a good thing I don't write Scarlett's Roost, because I don't want to write a story that's just checkboxes. I want to write a story full of characters and interesting dynamics. I wanted to prove that you don't have to rob your story of meaning and character significance just to check some boxes. Because that seemed wrong. So, anyway, back to Romelia. Romelia do Tomago is from a lesser noble family, but she ended up joining the Royal Guard on this idea of protecting justice and what it meant to really enforce the law. And over the course of the series, she starts in denial, for lack of a better explanation. She knows the current state of Valiance, and she wants it to be something other than what it is, and she's frustrated at how powerless she feels. So she starts off almost jealous of Scarlett being an outsider. And Leona is kind of like her counterpoint there. It's a protege she has under her wing, but Leona is this beastkin gladiator who just kind of... She follows the rules out of respect for Romelia, but Leona is very much closer to Scarlett in attitude and approach. And where Leona eventually gets, over the course of the story, gets broken down and eventually realizes she has to leave the Royal Guard, and ends up joining Phoenix Company, actually, because she's just not a good fit for the role that she's in. Romelia, by the end of it, decides to double down. Like, in the final confrontation, there was going to be this moment, like, before they go to confront Viola, back when she was still Violetta, just, the Void Walker version of her. There was going to be this moment in the Scarlett's Roost Tavern where Romelia's sitting there just thinking about, the whole city has been taken over by this powerful, nigh unstoppable person. And all of it is terrifying because she kind of sees the point to removing the nobility this way. A part of her goes, forcing the nobility out of their comfort zone and robbing them of the thing they abused to break things in their favor. It almost makes sense, and she's starting to get disillusioned. She doesn't know what to do. But then she looks at the symbol for the Royal Guard. She goes, it's not about what I personally think, would be a great end result. What matters is what this stands for. There is an appropriate way to do this that is kind to everybody. There is something to stand for that is for the sake of guarding people. To represent an ideal, it's super easy to let go of your ideals and slip into darkness and do whatever you please. But it's hard to hold yourself to a higher standard, to look to a symbol for meaning and then live by it. And so when she goes to confront the final boss, as it were, she goes in her full regalia, which she had not worn her full regalia for most of the story. She wore it like a little bit at the beginning for appearances and at the gala, but she didn't really wear it most of the story. So when she comes here in full regalia as head of the Knight Captains, it's symbolic of the fact that she's renewing her dedication to the ideals that she wants to stand for. And it's supposed to contrast the fact that our main antagonist had ideals she stood for, but she compromised them over the course of the story until she eventually lost her way completely. Which brings me to the more interesting character dynamic. It's another archetype in my setting, and I mix it up every time. So just because you see it once, don't think it's the same thing. I have an archetype I refer to as Mu. And that's because Mu in Japanese means nothing, or nothingness. And it's supposed to, every iteration of Mu is a character that when they are presenting as Mu, you have no way of knowing for sure who they are. I actively want to write them that way in every version. They will either have no history because it's all been wiped out via some shenanigans and nonsense, therefore they are not a person, or they are somebody in the story, and you will never know. Because the idea is to embody fully the essence of what it means to be a ninja. And it's using whatever tools are on hand. That is the essence of ninja, is to be the very embodiment of what it means wants to be a ninja. And the original character was just a silent protagonist, for lack of a better explanation. His original story was somebody investigating these odd occurrences in a given village, and there just being these mysterious notes that would show up signed Mu, and they're like, oh, it has to be somebody who's in the village, and they're trying to investigate, and there's no leads. There's not a single one. And then they one day cross paths with Mu, who says nothing, and can easily just slip out of sight. It's almost like your eyes lose focus on them because there's nothing there. And they're an agreeable being. They're very kind, but Mu doesn't really answer to you. Mu does as Mu sees fit, because there's nothing left to Mu except what they do, just the consequences for their actions. And in the case of Scarlett's Roost, this version of Mu, I will not tell you who it is, but this version of Mu ends up working for Lady Violetta, and is one of her main lieutenants. And they show up throughout the story in their other form in a very subtle way, and influencing Scarlett and her team. But when Violetta finally snaps and breaks her last taboo and starts draining bodies to make herself in this form, Mu is in the rafters. And Violetta tries to have a conversation with Mu. Tries to say, it's like, yeah, I know, I'm Violet, but it's for the greater good. And by the time she goes to look, desperate to have some kind of confirmation that she's not the bad guy, Mu's already gone. And our heroes later get news of what Lady Violetta is doing, and it's not directly provable that it was Mu letting it slip. But I'll tell you, it was Mu letting it slip. It was Mu giving them intel as to the best of their ability. Because the person that they respected and admired, the person who would help shape them into who they were, had lost their way, and they had lost respect for them. And therefore, for the ideals that person originally taught them, for the sake of the proper ideals of looking out for people, Mu ended up turning, but didn't have the heart to see it through themselves. It wasn't their place, it wasn't their role, and they didn't have the heart to. Because they respected her too much. They respected her too much to let her ideals die with her, and they respected her too much to kill her themselves. So, and I say them because the whole point is, again, to keep Mu's identity a secret. I know who they are. I know who they were in the story, and they do a very good job of hiding who they are in public. It's a really great thing. It's everything about the outfit design was supposed to do everything it could to mislead and hide the actual identity of Mu. So if I ever write it, just know that everything you think you know about Mu is designed to make you question if you know anything about Mu. That is the point. And if you see any version of Mu, know that there is either no history that you can uncover, or I am doing everything I can to make it completely impossible to be 100% certain who they really are. That's what I like about Mu. Finally, for character arcs in this story, we have the king himself. And the king himself he's such a passive role in this one, but it's not because he's not a character. It's because he recognizes that that's his role in this. As the king, he cannot get directly involved with the nobility without it becoming a problem, without coming across like a totalitarian. But he trusts Scarlett and the various agents around her to sort this out in a way that he can then use as kind of a means to gently come in and guide the people. And at the end of the story, after Violetta has become Viola, the king discovers 4 relics from the previous world that Violetta had been holding on to. They were all in the previous world supposed to be precautions against somebody who, if somebody discovered the lightning rune, a lightning sage had to be ready with the proper tools. So there were 4 tools. One was a circlet designed to kind of redirect any currents aimed for the brain. So that way anybody who knew enough about lightning rules to rewrite your memory or fiddle with your head couldn't mess with you. You would be able to think clearly and still come to decisive decisions. The second tool was similar to Scarlett's uncle with his arm that could dissipate all matter. There was a sword with similar runic networks that could dissipate any kind of, matter that came in contact with it. The idea being that if anybody became needlessly overpowered, or if there was an aeon that went wild, you could easily disperse that, damage the runic networks, dissipate the energies, return it to the earth. Just a simple, easy to solve problem. Just wave your sword, you're done. Then there was a staff made of a special material that was very susceptible and very responsive to electromagnetic fields, like the ones that are formed by runic networks, and that one could power using your own bioelectricity. And the idea being that anybody who was sufficiently skilled and knowledgeable holding this staff was capable of, for lack of a better explanation, forming runic networks in the air itself. It would still, and it'd be less strenuous. You would be able to more easily form runic networks and form things however you needed them in a more precise way. This is a bit of lore building for a different set of series in my realm, but it's a material from a different part of my realm that fits for what it needed to do. And the final one is a quartz crystal that one with the proper knowledge could, form circuits within the crystal itself of knowledge. For lack of an explanation, the circuits in there are like synapses. And every bit of knowledge every lightning sage had ever collected, they would end up putting into there. It was a way to chronicle history. It was a way to store information on how runic networks worked and every trick that's ever been tried with them. And generally speaking, it was the legacy of countless generations of runers all putting everything they had into this one crystal. And it's pretty sizable. It's a chunkin' rock, man. In fact, she carried it herself in like a giant lantern. Just for the sake of not like giant, but like a sizable size lantern. Like it's a decent sized lantern. We'll call it that. Slightly larger than average with a quartz crystal in it. And it was that way because, again, due to the fact that it has so much in it and everything already, it also served as a very, efficient form of light source. Just run a small current through and it lights up. So it was very easy for navigating places if you needed to as well. And it was a great cover for this crystal holds all the knowledge of mankind ever to, oh no, it's just a glowing rock. Very great way to hide it in plain sight. So with those 4 relics, the king discovered those and created a order specifically for containing and protecting those that worked alongside the Scarlet Order and is kind of a subdivision of them. Basically, in order to be a part of that order, you needed to have your own paradox gene completely ripped from you using the knowledge from that Violetta had, so that way you had nothing personal to gain from it. That you were not here gaining more power and becoming great. You had to have the very essence of your abilities just ripped from your body as kind of a solemn oath to the cause. And given the dangerous nature of these relics and the fact they didn't want any one person to have all of them, because look at what having all this power did to Violetta, an otherwise noble woman who had sworn herself to these codes, they decided it was wise to send these 4 artifacts, these 4 tools to the 4 corners. Just that way, if any one person got uppity with one of these things, the rest could still be used to bring them into line. So it was a precaution. And the king wasn't dumb. He wasn't going to go, just my order will have it. No, he actually trusted Scarlett more than he trusted himself. So he's like, I'm trusting, this is what we're going to do. Here's how we're doing it. I am trusting you to decide how to divvy these up, because you, more than anybody, know how dangerous these could be, because you saw what she could do firsthand. And so Scarlett ends up going, okay, fine. And she finds various ways to hide it. Of course, in the case of the southern continent, hundreds of years later, they would end up housing it in an underground vault, like a freaking Fallout vault, somewhere off property. And Scarlett took it one step further with the help of these people. It's like, okay, we don't just want that. We want to fashion keys. We want to create some kind of runic key that is complex enough where nobody can just hack into these vaults. But so they use the concept of aeons, the original version, which is just living elemental runic networks that you could put on objects or on people that could be used to, form certain things or to act certain ways. And they ended up creating four keys. And the idea being that while these keys would take various forms and would manifest in certain ways, that unless you had this marking, unless you had these eons on hand, or could recreate them precisely, exactly how they needed to be, you couldn't get into that vault, because Scarlett didn't want anybody being able to get their hands on any of this. This was the kind of dangerous knowledge that you couldn't just have lying around. So on the southern continent, it was a vault that was off property from the keep, I believe is what I've called it. But that's the southern base for the Scarlet Order. In the east, it was I think it was at the bottom of a lake. Because why not? Like, who the frick's gonna find? Who's gonna find the key? Go to the very bottom of the lake where you're probably gonna stop drowning or something, and open up a door into the floor of the bottom of a lake. It took a lot of work to make that one happen, I promise. In the north, they moved it a few different times. They moved the vault a few different times, and by the time of the Magnum Opus story, it's in an abandoned former academy. It was always usually at the seat of military power, just buried under, like, Fort Knox kind of stuff. But over time, they kind of lost the focus or concern for it, and it just kind of ended up becoming a secondary thought. They don't even remember the vault's there. Though there's records for it, because they're very studious, very well documented. But it's just that. And in the West, where everything's basically ravaged anyway, it was in the actual Scarlet Order base, but it's so frickin' lost in the endless hallways that were designed to fight off monsters that might try and infiltrate into the building, that nobody really goes down there anymore. Like, they know that there's a vault down there, they know there's something in there, but it's like, you want to go through all those monsters? Do you want to try and navigate those tunnels we lost the map to ages ago? No. Good. Nobody else does either. So it's safe. We're not going to think twice about it, because there's no point. It's done. It's already done. And so there's that. And the extra layer to all of this is Scarlett's cousin had a son. And that son would later grow up to become the father to my Nobunaga stand-in, Lord Lotus. And Lord Lotus is his own... We're going to cover that in the next video. But the short version is that Scarlett's nephew... I say nephew, it's her second cousin, but still. Scarlett's nephew returns to the Eastern Continent, which starts the Lotus Wars, which drives the Beastkin onto the Southern Continent, which has its own consequences. But she personally was trying to raise the kid that, like, heroes and folklore are important, that they embody the will of the people, and that, this is stuff that's significant, that you're going to hear stories that I'm going to attribute to various members of our family, and I want you to just hold them close to your heart. And take them with you everywhere you go, and tell them to other people. Perpetuate the legends, so people can learn the lessons of the past and do better. And it's a nice little character arc for her, where she goes from not recognizing that her actions have consequences to straight up, like, embracing that idea, embracing that ideal, and realizing that as much as these stories are important, that the next generation of heroes is going to want to hear how the world was saved, it's not going to, if she's 100% honest with it, it's not going to make people want to step up and be heroes. But if she makes the general pastels, kind of glosses over the messy parts the same way that she does when she's talking about people she cares about and admires, it'll make people want to step up to do that job. And it's once they've decided they're doing that job that they need to realize the real life consequences of their actions. Because before then, it's just, these are heroes. Just know that they're doing their best, and that's all you really need to know. It's only when you start doing this job that you need to be properly warned that this is not a perfect job. There's a lot of scars that come with it. And you are doing a good thing by being here, but you are not going to walk away unscathed. And I really like that idea for her, where she goes from not fully understanding her history and her effect on the larger world to fully embracing it and passing it on to the next generation. She sets the standards for many years to come of, if you join the Scarlet Order, you get to know what really happened in history. But if you do not, the world at large will never know what you have been through. No, nobody will really know your full story, because the world at large only needs to know the effect you had. And I like that as a character arc. So the short thing to take away from this is that Scarlett and Oceana had a sort of thing, and both family lines are vaguely aware of this, that there is a close connection between the Oceana family and the Phoenix bloodline. That will come into play in the follow-up series. And it's a nice little thing of just like, the reason that they couldn't be together wasn't because of social norms, etc., etc. It was because they had different roles. They had different roles, and therefore it just wasn't going to work. But neither one hated each other, and neither one was opposed. They just had different lives, different roads they had walked, different scars, and different responsibilities in the eyes of the world at large. And so it just didn't line up. And that's just life. Sometimes somebody can feel some way about you, and you can feel some way back, but it's just not going to work because of circumstance. And I thought that was probably a really nice way to approach romance within Scarlett's Roost, is this idea of like, it's not for lack of love, and it's not for lack of care for one another. It's out of mutual respect for your responsibilities and your role in life. Because to try and make it more than it is disrespectful to what you represent and what you're currently doing. And it's nice. It's a nice way to do that. Anyway, that should do it for the character arcs and wrapping up the end of Scarlett's Roost. Next time we're going to get into the actual 4-volume series properly. That's going to be fun. Anyway, so next video is going to be that.